The turkey glistened under lamplight, its skin bronzed to perfection, crackling with rendered fat and herb butter. Eliza Hayes stood back from the massive bird, her hands trembling despite 20 minutes of rest. 38 hours since her last real meal. A crust of stale bread yesterday morning, saved from the batch she'd baked for the Harrington household 3 days prior. Her stomach had stopped growling around hour 30. Now it just ached, a hollow throb that made her vision swim at the edges. She pressed her palms against the cool marble countertop, steadying herself. The kitchen stretched around her like a cathedral dedicated to abundance. Copper pots hung from iron hooks, each one worth more than she earned in a month. The cast iron range imported from Chicago at tremendous expense radiated heat that should have been comforting, but only made her lightheaded. Through the service door, she could see into the dining room where 12 place settings awaited the evening's guests. Sterling silver flatware, each piece stamped with the Harrington crest. Bohemian crystal glasses that caught the chandelier light and threw rainbows across the damask tablecloth. Limoges porcelain plates hand-painted with delicate roses shipped from France at a cost that could feed a working family for 2 years. Eliza calculated without meaning to. The silverware alone $85 per setting. 7 months of her wages for a single fork, knife, and spoon. The crystal, $120 for the complete set. The porcelain, $200. She could live for 10 years on what graced that table for a single meal. Her reflection caught in a polished serving platter. A gaunt face stared back all sharp angles and hollow cheeks. When had she become so thin? She was 25 years old and looked 40. Her hair, once thick and lustrous, hung limp beneath her cap. Her hands, red and raw from endless scrubbing, bore scars from burns and cuts accumulated over a decade of other people's kitchens. She barely recognized herself anymore. The date was November 22nd, 1883. Thursday. Thanksgiving. The most American of holidays, a day meant for gratitude and family and shared abundance. Eliza had been cooking since 4 o'clock that morning. 14 hours of constant motion. Plucking the turkey, cleaning it, seasoning it. Preparing the oysters that had arrived on ice from Seattle, transported 7 days by railroad at stunning expense. Crafting the French onion soup with imported Gruyere cheese. Arranging the autumn salad with candied walnuts. Baking 3 kinds of pie, their crust golden and perfect, cooling now on the windowsill. Mrs. Victoria Harrington swept into the kitchen with the rustle of expensive silk. Her gown, ordered from San Francisco, had cost $150. She was 55 years old, the wife of Harold Harrington, owner of the First Montana Bank and the wealthiest man in Miles City. Her face bore the carefully maintained beauty of someone who had never missed a meal, never scrubbed a floor, never worked until her hands bled. The guests arrive in 30 minutes. Mrs. Harrington's voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. Everything must be perfect. Senator Douglas is attending. Perfect. Do you understand me? Eliza nodded. She had learned long ago that speaking invited criticism. Silence was safer. Turkey at exactly 6 o'clock. Not 5:59, not 6:01. 6 o'clock precisely. Mrs. Harrington's eyes swept the kitchen, cataloging, judging. You'll eat after we've finished, if there's anything left. 13 years. 13 years since Eliza's parents had died of typhoid fever in their small Virginia farmhouse, leaving 12-year-old Eliza alone in a world that had no place for orphaned girls without money or connections. 6 months in an overcrowded orphanage where children fought over scraps, then hired out as a scullery maid to a family in Richmond. At 15, her first position as a cook. At 18, she'd come west to Montana Territory, chasing the promise of opportunity that never quite materialized. 10 years, 12 different kitchens, 12 different families who looked through her as if she were invisible. A ghost who cooked their meals and cleaned their dishes and disappeared into the shadows between services. Mrs. Harrington departed without another word. Eliza returned to her work. The menu was ambitious, designed to impress. Oysters on ice for the first course, French onion soup, the salad. Then the main event, the 18-pound turkey with honey-glazed ham, 6 different side dishes. Finally, the pies, pumpkin apple and mincemeat, each one a work of art she would never taste. She lifted the pot of soup, 20 pounds of liquid and ceramic, and felt her arms shake. The pot tilted. She caught it at the last second, but hot liquid sloshed over the rim and scalded her right hand. She bit down on her lip to keep from crying out. The burn was nothing new. Her hands were covered in old scars, a map of 10 years' worth of kitchen accidents. She ran cold water over the fresh burn, watching the skin redden and blister. Mrs. Harrington had not noticed. Mrs. Harrington never noticed. Outside through the kitchen window, Eliza saw a bogey arrive. Not the four-horse carriages that usually delivered the Harrington social set, just a simple two-wheeled bogey, practical and unadorned. A man climbed down, moving with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own body. He wore a plain black suit, well-made but without ostentation. His boots were hand-tooled leather, expensive work, but they bore the honest dirt of actual use. He carried his hat in his hands as he approached the door, turning it slowly, a gesture that spoke of courtesy rather than nervousness. Something about him looked different from the usual guests. Eliza couldn't name what exactly. Perhaps it was the way he moved without the affected mannerisms of Miles City's social elite. Perhaps it was his face, weathered by sun and wind, marked by experience rather than privilege. He looked real in a way the others didn't. The front door opened. Eliza heard Mrs. Harrington's voice shift to honeyed warmth. "Mr. Branson, how delightful to see you. Please do come in." Branson, Eliza knew the name. Everyone in Montana Territory knew the name. Cole Branson, the cattle baron, self-made millionaire. The man who'd arrived in Montana with nothing after the war and built an empire from grass and determination. She'd heard the stories whispered by merchants and laborers, how he'd come west in 1867 with $12 and a lame horse, how he'd worked as a hired cowboy for 3 years saving every penny, how he'd bought his first 100 head of cattle and turned them into 1,000 through shrewd management and brutal hard work, how he now owned 15,000 head of cattle, 50,000 acres of prime grazing land shares in the Northern Pacific Railroad, in a stockyard operation that made him wealthier than most Eastern bankers. What she hadn't heard was why a man worth $800,000 would dress so simply or drive his own buggy. Guests began arriving in earnest. Senator Douglas from Washington here to discuss railroad expansion, Judge Whitmore, who presided over the territorial court, Colonel Anderson, retired cavalry officer, 3 wealthy ranchers with their elaborately dressed wives, and Caroline, Mrs. Harrington's niece, visiting from Boston, a beautiful young woman in the latest fashion, clearly positioned as a potential match for Mr. Branson. Eliza began serving. She moved through the dining room like a ghost, as she'd been trained to do. Place the dish, step back, wait to be dismissed. Never make eye contact. Never speak unless directly addressed. Become invisible. The first course was the oysters. She arranged them on beds of crushed ice, each one open to reveal the glistening meat inside. She placed them before each guest with practiced precision. Not one person said thank you. Not one person looked at her face. The soup followed. Rich dark, topped with melted cheese and crusty bread. She poured from a heavy tureen, moving clockwise around the table. Her burned hand throbbed with each movement. The conversation flowed around her, a river of words about investments and politics and social gossip. Senator Douglas expounded on railroad opportunities. Judge Whitmore told jokes that made the ladies titter behind their hands. Carolyn tried repeatedly to engage Mr. Branson in conversation, asking about opera and art and European travel. His responses were polite but distant, his attention seeming to drift elsewhere. "Mr. Branson, you really must visit Washington," the senator pressed. "All opportunities in railroad expansion. A man of your means could profit handsomely." "I prefer open range to closed rooms, Senator." Cole Branson's voice was deep measured, each word chosen with care. "Have you attended the opera, Mr. Branson?" Carolyn leaned forward, displaying her décolletage to advantage. "The performances in Boston are simply divine." "No, ma'am. Cattle don't much care for opera." Uncomfortable laughter rippled around the table. He didn't fit their world, Eliza realized. Despite his wealth, despite Mrs. Harrington's obvious efforts to absorb him into her social circle, he remained apart, an outsider in a fine suit. She brought the salad course, mixed greens with candied walnuts and a honey vinaigrette she'd spent an hour perfecting. As she moved around the table, Richard Harrington, Mrs. Harrington's son, reached out as she poured his wine. His fingers brushed her wrist, lingering a moment too long. She jerked back reflexively, nearly spilling the wine. Richard laughed, a sound without humor. "Careful, girl. Mother's wine costs more than you make in a month." The comment drew chuckles from several guests. Eliza's face burned, but she kept her expression neutral, her eyes down. She finished pouring and retreated to the kitchen. Through the service door, she could see Mr. Branson's face. His jaw had tightened. His hand on his fork showed white knuckles. Something in his expression reminded her of a man barely restraining himself. The main course arrived. She'd timed everything perfectly. The turkey emerged from the oven at exactly the right moment, its skin crisp and golden, its meat tender and juicy. She arranged it on the massive serving platter, surrounded by roasted vegetables and fresh herbs. The ham glistened beside it, glazed with honey and studded with cloves. The side dishes filled the remaining space on the table, a feast of abundance that could have fed 20 families. She carried the turkey through the service door. The platter was heavy, at least 30 pounds of food and ceramic. Her arms shook. 38 hours without real food. 14 hours of constant work. The burn on her right hand screamed with pain. She felt the platter start to slip. She caught it, barely, set it on the table with a grace that cost her every ounce of remaining strength. No one noticed. She moved to pour the wine for the main course, a Burgundy from France imported at tremendous cost. As she reached Richard Harrington again, her hand trembled. Just slightly. Just enough. 3 drops of wine fell onto the tablecloth. The Belgian lace tablecloth that Mrs. Harrington had purchased for $40. Clumsy fool! Mrs. Harrington's voice cracked like a whip across the dining room. All conversation stopped. Every face turned toward Eliza. That lace is imported. Do you have any idea what it cost? Eliza's face burned with shame. She kept her back straight, her eyes down. I apologize, ma'am. Apologize? That hardly repairs the damage. Mrs. Harrington's face had gone red with fury. This is inexcusable. Mother, relax. Richard leaned back in his chair, smirking. She's only the help. You can't expect too much. The table erupted in amused laughter. The ladies hid their smiles behind their napkins. The gentlemen shook their heads at the incompetence of servants. Even Caroline giggled, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. Eliza stood frozen, the wine bottle still in her hand. The laughter washed over her like acid. 10 years. 10 years of this. 10 years of being less than human to people who had everything while she had nothing. She caught movement from the corner of her eye. Mr. Branson had set down his fork. The silver clinked against the porcelain with a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. Every face turned toward him. His eyes met Eliza's, just for a second. In that moment, she saw something that made her breath catch. Recognition. Not of her specifically, but of what she represented. He saw her, really saw her, not as a servant or a ghost, but as a person. Will the cook be joining us for dinner? The question hung in the air like smoke. Mrs. Harrington's mouth opened and closed without sound. Senator Douglas choked on his wine. Judge Whitmore's fork clattered to his plate. Then the laughter started again, louder this time, incredulous. Mr. Branson, surely you just... Mrs. Harrington's voice pitched high with shock. My dear Cole, she's the help. Senator Douglas wiped tears from his eyes. This is Montana, not a charity house. Judge Whitmore slapped the table. Caroline reached across to pat Mr. Branson's hand. How charmingly democratic of you, Mr. Branson. Perhaps the altitude affects you, Richard sneered. Cole, you're making a fool of yourself. She's just a cook. But Mr. Branson didn't laugh. He sat perfectly still, his eyes moving from face to face around the table. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. Some things matter more than money. Mrs. Harrington drew herself up. I beg your pardon? Treating people decent, that matters more than any business deal. Mr. Branson, please sit down. Mrs. Harrington's voice trembled with shock and anger. You're embarrassing yourself. Richard. Cole turned to face the younger man directly. You mentioned that bank investment you wanted, $50,000 to expand into Helena. Richard's smirk widened. Yes, a tremendous opportunity for a man of vision. My answer is no. I'm withdrawing my interest. The smirk vanished. You can't be serious. Judge Whitmore. Cole's gaze shifted. Those stockyard contracts that go through your court, I'll be renegotiating them through Helena, with judges who understand fairness. The judge sputtered. Now see here, that's highly irregular. Senator Douglas. Cole stood his chair scraping against the floor. I'll be writing to my friends in Washington about your flexible ethics, about who you really represent. The senator's face went purple. That's slander. It's truth, and you know it. Cole turned toward the kitchen door, toward Eliza, who stood frozen, the wine bottle still clutched in her burned hand. Ma'am, his voice softened, there's a diner in town. Honest food, good people. Would you do me the honor of joining me? The war played across Eliza's face. Fear, pride, hope, calculation. She had $2.85 to her name. 5 more days of rent at Mrs. Pepper's boarding house. After that, nothing. If she left this position, she would be unemployed in a town where Mrs. Harrington controlled every kitchen worth working in. But this man saw her. For the first time in 10 years, someone saw her as a human being. Her hands moved to her apron strings. The burned hand protested, but she ignored it. She untied the knot. The apron fell away. Underneath her plain dress was stained and worn, but it was hers. She folded the apron neatly and set it on the counter. I'll get my coat. 3 words that changed everything. Stop. Mrs. Harrington's shriek could have shattered the crystal. You walk out that door, girl, you'll never work in this town again. Do you hear me? Never. Eliza walked to the coat rack by the service entrance. Her coat was threadbare, patched at the elbows, but clean. She put it on with deliberate care, buttoning each button. Mr. Branson, think about what you're doing. Richard stood now, his face twisted with anger. You're throwing away your position in this community for a cook. My position. Cole retrieved his own hat from the foyer stand. Gentlemen, ladies, I appreciate the invitation. But I find I've lost my appetite. He offered Eliza his arm. She hesitated, then took it. His coat was fine wool, warm beneath her fingers. Together they walked toward the front door. Behind them, chaos erupted. Mrs. Harrington's voice rose to a shriek. Senator Douglas sputtered threats. Judge Whitmore pounded the table. Richard's cursing would have shocked a cowboy. The other guests gabbled among themselves, torn between scandal and excitement. Cole opened the door. November cold rushed in sharp and clean. The temperature had dropped to 28 degrees. Stars blazed overhead in the crystalline air, more stars than Eliza had ever seen despite 10 years in Montana. Her breath formed clouds in the darkness. They stepped onto the porch. Behind them, the door slammed shut with a finality that seemed to echo across the prairie. Through the windows, Eliza could see the dinner party dissolving into argument. Hands waved, faces contorted with rage and shock. She started to shiver. The thin coat did nothing against the cold. Without a word, Cole shrugged out of his own coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was enormous on her, hanging nearly to her ankles, but the residual warmth from his body felt like a benediction. Thank you. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. But you'll freeze. I've been colder. He started down the path toward the street. Come on. It's a mile to town. They walked in silence. Behind them, the Harrington mansion blazed with light, a monument to wealth and privilege. Ahead, the small town of Miles City glimmered with more modest lamps, the honest light of working people settling in for the night. Eliza's mind reeled. What had she done? She'd walked away from the only work she knew in a town where everyone would hear about this scandal by morning. Mrs. Harrington would make sure of it. She had 5 days of money left. 5 days, and then what? Sleep in the street, beg head to another town with no references, and winter closing in. Why did you do that? The question escaped before she could stop it. Cole was quiet for several steps. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. My mother cooked for wealthy families back in Cheyenne. Colonel Henderson's household mostly. She'd work from before dawn until past midnight, serving their dinners, cleaning their messes. I was 13 years old, waiting at home trying to keep her supper warm on the stove. He paused, his breath clouding in the cold air. She'd come home so tired she couldn't eat, too tired to even sit down. She'd just collapse in her chair and stare at nothing. I'd beg her to eat, to rest. She'd say tomorrow, always tomorrow. Eliza felt something tighten in her chest. 3 months later, she was dead. Consumption, the doctor said. But I knew better. She was 39 years old and worked herself to death for people who never once said thank you, never once saw her as human. He stopped walking and turned to face Eliza. His eyes in the starlight were dark and fierce. I was too young to protect her then, too poor to make anyone listen, but I'm not too young anymore, and I'm not too poor. Understanding washed over Eliza like cold water. This wasn't about her specifically. This was about his mother, about a debt he could never repay to a woman long dead, about using the power he'd built to honor a memory. I'm sorry about your mother. She meant it. But you've just destroyed your business relationships, your social position, all for a stranger. Those relationships were built on treating people like you as less than human. If that's the price of doing business with the Harringtons and their friends, I don't want to pay it. They started walking again. The town drew closer. Eliza could see the main street now, the buildings dark except for scattered windows still lit. One building in particular showed warm light, a small restaurant squeezed between the livery stable and the post office. A hand-painted sign hung above the door, Ida's Diner. Have you eaten today? Cole asked. Eliza's pride warred with her honesty. Honesty won. Bread crust yesterday morning. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He opened the diner door. A bell chimed overhead. Warmth and light and the smell of real food washed over them. The diner was simple. 6 tables with mismatched chairs, a counter with 8 stools, tin ceiling plank floors worn smooth by decades of boots. A potbelly stove in the corner radiated heat. The walls were bare wood, unadorned except for a yellowing map of Montana Territory and a faded photograph of a man in Union cavalry uniform. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 60s, solid and square with iron gray hair, pulled back in a practical bun. She looked up as they entered, her weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. Cole Branson. Well as I live and breathe. Thought you'd be at the Harringtons' fancy dinner. Change of plans, Ida. Cole guided Eliza to a table by the window. This is Miss Eliza Hayes. We're hoping for something warm. Ida's sharp eyes took in Eliza's thin frame, her exhausted face, the careful way she moved as if every muscle hurt. Her expression softened with understanding. Women like Ida knew what it meant to work until you broke. Sit yourselves down, honey. Coffee's fresh. She disappeared into the kitchen before Cole could respond. Eliza sank into the chair, and the simple act of sitting felt like grace. Her feet throbbed, her burned hand pulsed with pain. But the chair supported her, and the warmth seeped into her bones, and for the first time in 14 hours, she wasn't moving. Ida returned with 2 heavy ceramic mugs filled with black coffee. Real Arbuckle's coffee, the good stuff, not the chicory blend most restaurants served. The steam rose in fragrant spirals. Eliza wrapped her hands around the mug. The heat against her burned palms should have hurt, but somehow it felt right. She took a sip. The coffee was strong and bitter and absolutely perfect. Food's coming? Ida patted Eliza's shoulder with rough kindness and returned to the kitchen. Cole sat across from her, his own coffee untouched. He was studying her face in the lamplight, and Eliza realized with a start that he was seeing her. Really seeing her, not evaluating her usefulness or judging her appearance, just looking at her as a person. Tell me about yourself, he said. There's not much to tell. Tell me anyway. So she did. The words came haltingly at first, then faster. Virginia, 1858. Parents who farmed 40 acres that barely sustained them. The typhoid that swept through in 1870, taking both her parents within a week. The orphanage where children fought over bread crusts. Being hired out at 12 as a scullery maid. Learning to cook because it meant better treatment, higher wages. Coming west at 18 because Montana promised opportunities that never quite materialize. 10 years, 12 kitchens, invisibility. Cole listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded slowly. I was born in Missouri, 1843. My father farmed corn that never quite paid what we owed the bank. When the war started, I was 18. Enlisted in the Union cavalry, partly because I believed in the cause, mostly because I was running from grief over my mother dying. Ida emerged with plates, turkey sandwiches with thick sliced meat on fresh sourdough bread, mashed potatoes swimming in real butter, gravy made from turkey drippings, green beans that actually tasted like vegetables instead of the mushy canned version most restaurants served. The portions were generous, almost obscene, after Eliza's years of scraps and leftovers. On the house, Ida held up a hand when Cole reached for his wallet. Don't argue with me, Cole Branson. Sometimes a man does something right. That should be celebrated. She winked. Doesn't happen often enough. Eliza stared at her plate. The food was real and solid and right there in front of her. Her hands trembled as she lifted the sandwich. The first bite exploded with flavor. Tender turkey, fresh bread, the slight tang of mustard. She closed her eyes. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. Cole looked away, giving her privacy for this moment. When she opened her eyes again, he was focused on his own plate, eating with deliberate slowness. "I haven't sat down to eat Thanksgiving in 10 years, she whispered. "Then this is long overdue." They ate in comfortable silence. Eliza forced herself to slow down to savor each bite instead of wolfing the food like an animal. Her stomach, shrunken from deprivation, protested the sudden abundance. She ate half the sandwich and most of the potatoes before her body insisted she stop. Cole finished his meal and signaled Ida for more coffee. The diner was nearly empty. An old rancher sat at the counter nursing a cup and reading a week-old newspaper. A young couple shared pie in the corner, speaking in low voices, their hands intertwined on the table. "What will you do now?" Cole asked. Reality crashed back. "I don't know. Find work somehow, Mrs. Harrington will make sure no one in Miles City hires me." "How long can you survive?" Pride demanded she lie. Honesty won again. "5 days. I have $2.85. Room at Mrs. Pepper's boarding house costs $1.50 a week. That leaves me enough for basic food if I'm careful." "And after 5 days," Eliza met his eyes, "I'll figure something out. I always have." Cole leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I have a proposition. Business, nothing improper." Eliza tensed. She'd heard that phrase before. It never meant what it claimed to mean. He must have seen her reaction because he held up both hands. "My ranch runs 12 hands through winter, 20 in summer. Good men, hard workers, but they're tired of eating food that could double as boot leather. Old Pete does his best, but cooking isn't his gift. You're offering me work. I'm offering you a position. $20 a month, room in the main house with a lock on the doorboard, with the hands not separate. You'd be an employee, Miss Hayes, not a servant. There's a difference. $20 a month, 67% more than the Harringtons had paid. Plus room and board, which meant she could actually save money instead of spending every penny on survival. Why so generous? It's not generous. It's fair. You have a skill I need. That's commerce, not charity. Is this charity? The question came out harder than she intended. Cole's eyes flashed. "Ma'am, I don't do charity. I do business. If you can't cook, I won't hire you. But I watched you work tonight. You're skilled, organized, efficient. I need that. You need employment. That's mutual benefit." Eliza's mind raced through calculations. $20 a month for 11 months, she could save over $200. With $200, she could start her own restaurant, or buy passage east, or homestead her own land under the provisions that allowed single women to file claims. Options, real options, freedom. But something else occurred to her, an idea that had been forming in the back of her mind since Cole had stood up at that dinner table. "What if we did more than just feeding ranch hands?" Cole tilted his head. "How do you mean? This town has people like us, working families who'll never sit at the Harringtons' table. People who cook and clean and build and sweat, and they're invisible too." She leaned forward, the idea taking fire. "What if next Thanksgiving we created something different? A dinner where everyone's equal, where working people sit down together, no servants, no masters, just people sharing a meal." Cole's expression transformed. The hard lines of his face softened. His eyes lit with something that looked like hope. He stood and extended his hand across the table. "Partners." Eliza looked at his hand, calloused from real work despite his wealth, scarred from old wounds, steady and strong and offered without condescension. Not employer to employee, partners. She stood and took his hand. Her grip was firm despite the burned palm. "Partners." They shook on it, and Eliza felt something shift in her chest. A door opening, a path forward. For the first time since her parents died 13 years ago, she wasn't just surviving. She was building towards something. Cole walked her back to the boarding house. The streets were empty, the town settled for the night. Mrs. Pepper's establishment was dark except for a single lamp in the front window, left burning for late arrivals. They stopped at the foot of the steps. "I'll have my foreman bring a wagon tomorrow afternoon. We can move your things to the ranch. I'll be ready. They stood in awkward silence for a moment. So much had changed in the past 3 hours. Eliza's entire world had shifted on its axis. She wanted to say something profound, something that captured the magnitude of what this man had done, but words failed her. Thank you. It was inadequate, but it was all she had. Not just for the job, for seeing me. Cole settled his hat on his head. You're easy to see, Miss Hayes. Most people just choose not to look. He waited until she was safely inside before walking back toward the center of town where his buggy waited. Eliza climbed the narrow stairs to her room on the second floor. The room was small, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a dresser. The walls were thin enough that she could hear Mrs. Wilson snoring in the next room. But it was hers, paid for with her own wages, and for 5 more days at least it was home. She lit the oil lamp on the dresser and sat on the bed. Her entire body ached with exhaustion. 14 hours of cooking, a mile walk in the cold, the emotional upheaval of the evening. She should sleep, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. She pulled out her Bible, the only possession she had from her parents. Inside the front cover, she kept her money, $2.85 in coins and small bills. She counted it twice, confirming what she already knew. 5 days. But 5 days from now, she'd be at Cole Branson's ranch, with a real job, real wages, real possibilities. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Eliza Hayes smiled. Not the careful, placating smile she wore in other people's kitchens. A real smile, genuine and unguarded. Through the window, she could see the first snowflakes beginning to fall, drifting down through the lamplight like blessings. Winter was coming to Montana territory, but for once Eliza felt warm all the way through. Tomorrow consequences would arrive. Mrs. Harrington would make good on her threats. The gossip would spread. Doors would close, but other doors had opened. Better doors. She blew out the lamp and lay down in the darkness. As sleep finally claimed her, her last thought was of Cole Branson's face when she'd agreed to be his partner. The way his eyes had lit up. The way he'd smiled, genuine and unguarded, perhaps for the first time in years. 2 broken people, she thought. 2 people the world had tried to make invisible. But they'd found each other across a dinner table in a mansion where neither of them belonged. And tomorrow they'd start building something new. Morning light pierced through the thin curtains of Eliza's room, cold and bright. She woke with yesterday's warmth still wrapped around her like a blanket. Then reality settled in with the weight of stone. Friday, November 23rd. She was unemployed in a town where the wealthiest woman had sworn to destroy her. She dressed quickly in her second dress, the gray wool that was only slightly less worn than the one she'd ruined yesterday with kitchen stains. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar motions of pinning her hair, but her mind raced ahead, calculating possibilities and disasters in equal measure. The boarding house was quiet. Most residents had already left for their day's work. Eliza descended the narrow stairs to find Mrs. Pepper sweeping the front hallway, her round face creased with concern. Miss Hayes, I heard about last night. The landlady's voice carried that particular tone of sympathy mixed with self-preservation. Mrs. Harrington's driver came by at dawn. She wanted to know if you were staying here. Eliza's stomach dropped. What did you tell her? The truth, that you're paid through Monday and I'm not in the business of throwing out tenants who've done me no wrong. Mrs. Pepper set down her broom. But after Monday, dear, I can't renew your room. Mrs. Harrington made it very clear that anyone who helps you will lose her business. I've got 8 rooms to fill and bills to pay. I understand. Eliza forced the words past the tightness in her throat. Thank you for being honest with me. She stepped out into the November morning. The temperature had dropped overnight, hovering around 20 degrees. The snow from last night had left a thin white coating on the street already trampled to gray slush by morning traffic. Her breath formed clouds as she walked toward the main street, toward the businesses that might still offer employment. The general store first. Mr. Hendricks had always been kind, commenting favorably on her purchases, treating her with the basic courtesy most merchants extended to regular customers. The bell chimed as she entered. The store smelled of coffee and leather and dried goods, familiar and usually comforting. Mr. Hendricks looked up from his ledger. His face, normally open and friendly, went carefully neutral. Miss Hayes. Mr. Hendricks, I'm inquiring about employment. I understand you sometimes need help in the store or perhaps in your home kitchen. The merchant set down his pen with deliberate care. He wouldn't meet her eyes. I'm afraid all positions are filled. I see, perhaps you know of someone else who might need help. Miss Hayes? He finally looked at her and she saw genuine regret in his face. Mrs. Harrington was here when I opened this morning. She made it quite clear that you're unreliable, that you abandoned your position without notice, that you engaged in improper behavior with Mr. Branson. The words hit like physical blows. That's not true. I gave no notice because I was given no respect, and Mr. Branson was perfectly proper. I believe you, I do. Hendricks spread his hands helplessly. But the Harrington family spends $150 a month in my store. I've got 2 sons to feed and a wife who depends on this business. I can't risk losing that custom. I'm sorry, I truly am. Eliza left without another word. The pattern repeated at the Montana restaurant where Chef Andre apologized in his thick French accent while explaining that Mrs. Harrington had threatened to take her family's $80 in monthly dining elsewhere. At the boarding house across town where Mrs. Chen needed kitchen help, but couldn't risk antagonizing the ladies' society that Mrs. Harrington controlled. At the hotel where Mr. Peters, who'd always been friendly, now looked at her with pity and closed his door. By noon, Eliza had tried 11 establishments, 11 polite rejections. The word had spread faster than winter wind. Unreliable, inappropriate, not to be trusted. Mrs. Harrington had been thorough in her destruction. Eliza's feet ached. Her burned hand throbbed, but worse was the hollow feeling in her chest, the creeping realization that she had no options left in this town. She stopped at the general store again this time just to buy food. Bread for 10 cents. Cheese for 15 cents. Dried beans for another 10 cents. 35 cents, 12% of her remaining money for food that would last 3 days if she was careful. She was counting out the coins when a familiar voice spoke behind her. Miss Hayes, she turned. Cole Branson stood in the doorway, hat in hand, his face set in hard lines. Behind him, his buggy waited in the street, the same practical vehicle from yesterday. He wore working clothes today, not the fine suit. Canvas pants, a heavy wool shirt, boots that had seen real labor. Mr. Branson, she felt her face flush with shame. He would see her buying the cheapest food available. He would know how desperate she'd become in less than 24 hours. Have you found work? Pride demanded she lie. But she'd made a promise to herself last night watching the snowfall. No more invisibility, no more pretending to be less than she was. No, Mrs. Harrington has been quite thorough in her warnings. No one will hire me. Cole's jaw tightened until the muscles stood out like cords. He turned to Hendricks, who'd been watching this exchange with obvious discomfort. Send Miss Hayes's purchases to my account. Add whatever else she needs for the week. Mr. Branson, I don't need charity. Eliza's voice came out sharper than she intended. It's not charity. You're my employee as of today. Consider it an advance on your first month's wages. He turned back to Hendricks. Well, the merchant nodded quickly. Of course, Mr. Branson. Whatever you say. Cole gestured toward the door. Walk with me. They stepped outside into the cold. The main street of Miles City bustled with midday traffic. Wagons rattled past. Cowboys rode by on their way to the saloons. A group of women, all members of Mrs. Harrington's social circle, stopped their conversation to stare at Eliza with undisguised judgment. Cole guided her to a bench outside the post office away from immediate scrutiny. They sat in silence for a moment. A freight wagon loaded with lumber passed by the driver calling out to his team. Somewhere down the street, a blacksmith's hammer rang against an anvil in steady rhythm. This is my fault, Cole said quietly. No, I made my choice. Because I put you in an impossible position. You offered me dignity. The position was already impossible. You just made it visible. He turned to look at her directly. The bank deal fell through this morning. Harrington sent word at dawn, called me a radical, said he can't do business with a man who doesn't respect proper social order. Eliza's stomach sank. How much did you lose? The potential return would have been $50,000 over 5 years, but it required me putting capital in his bank, trusting him with my money while he used it to expand into Helena. I never liked the terms anyway. $50,000. The number was incomprehensible. More money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. And you lost it because of me. I lost nothing that matters. His voice carried absolute conviction. Money's just a tool, Miss Hayes. I've got more than I can spend in 3 lifetimes. What good is it if I can't use it to stand up for what's right? But the social consequences, the business relationships, were built on sand. He leaned back against the bench, his eyes distant. I came to Montana with $12 in a horse I won in a poker game. Spent 4 years in the war before that watching good men die for principles. If I learned anything, it's that compromise on core values is just a slow way of losing yourself. A woman passed by one of the ladies from Mrs. Harrington's dinner party. She looked at them, her lip curling with disdain, and made a show of crossing to the other side of the street. "You're being ostracized," Eliza said. "I'm being separated from people I never liked anyway." Cole stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, let me show you something." They walked to where his buggy waited. He helped her up to the seat, his hand steady and strong under her elbow. The buggy was simple but well-made, built for function rather than show. He climbed up beside her and took the reins. They drove north out of town, following the road that paralleled the Tongue River. The landscape opened up around them, rolling prairie touched with early snow. The mountains rose in the distance, blue and eternal. The air was clean and sharp, carrying the scent of sage and cold earth. After 20 minutes, they crested a rise and the ranch appeared below. Eliza caught her breath. The main house sat in a valley protected by low hills. It was built of pine logs, 2 stories with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys, promising warmth inside. The construction was solid and honest, built by men who knew their craft. This wasn't a mansion designed to impress. This was a home designed to last. Around the main house, the ranch spread out in practical efficiency. A massive barn with a new roof, the lumber still golden and fresh. Corrals with good fencing, the posts set deep and the rails straight. A bunkhouse for the hand smoke rising from its chimney as well. A smokehouse, a root cellar with its characteristic mounded roof, a blacksmith sheet with an anvil visible through the open door. 50,000 acres, Cole said, his voice carrying quiet pride. Claimed it piece by piece over 16 years. Homestead Act, Desert Land Act, preemption claims. All legal, all documented. 15,000 head of cattle scattered across the range. 12 permanent hands through winter 20 when we're running full operations in summer. He drove down the hill toward the main house. As they approached, men emerged from the barn and bunkhouse, curiosity drawing them out. They were the kind of men you saw throughout Montana territory. Weathered faces, work-hardened bodies, eyes that measured strangers with caution, born of experience. Cole pulled the buggy to a stop and helped Eliza down. The men gathered around, keeping a respectful distance, but clearly interested in this unexpected visitor. "Boys, this is Miss Eliza Hayes. She'll be our new cook starting today." Cole's voice carried easy authority. "She's also my business partner in a project we're starting. Anyone who disrespects her answers to me. We clear?" "Yes, boss." The response came in a ragged chorus. An older man stepped forward, somewhere in his 50s, with iron gray hair and a cavalry scar across his left cheek. "Dutch Hanson, ma'am. Foreman here. Pleased to make your acquaintance." "Mr. Hanson." "Just Dutch, ma'am. We don't stand on ceremony much." One by one, the others introduced themselves. Charlie, barely 20, with eager eyes and a quick smile. Miguel, a vaquero from New Mexico, with the best hands for horses any of them had ever seen. Thomas, a freedman, who'd come west after the war seeking land and opportunity. Red, a Scotsman who could track cattle through a blizzard. The others each with their own stories, their own reasons for ending up on Cole Branson's ranch. "Where's Pete?" Cole asked. "Kitchen trying to figure out supper." Dutch's expression turned diplomatic. "He's doing his best. Tell him to show Miss Hayes where everything is, then he can get back to his regular duties." Relief washed across Dutch's face. "He'll be grateful, boss. We all will. No offense to Pete, but his cooking could double as mortar." The men laughed, the tension breaking. Cole led Eliza toward the main house. The porch steps were solid under her feet, the wood aged but maintained. Cole opened the door and gestured her inside. The interior matched the exterior, solid, practical, comfortable. The main room held a massive stone fireplace, already laid with wood ready for evening. Furniture built for use rather than show, but well-made and comfortable. A desk in the corner covered with ledgers and papers. Bookshelves holding an eclectic mix of volumes ranging from cattle management to history to poetry. To the right, the kitchen opened up. It was easily twice the size of most ranch kitchens, with a magnificent cast iron range that must have cost a fortune to ship from Chicago. Copper pots hung from hooks, real copper, expensive and practical. A large work table dominated the center. Windows on two sides let in good light. A hand pump over a deep sink luxury in a territory where most people still hauled water from wells. An older cowboy stood at the stove staring at a pot with the expression of a man contemplating his own execution. He looked up as they entered, relief flooding his weathered face. "Boss, thank God, I was about to poison the whole crew." "Pete, this is Miss Eliza Hayes. She'll be taking over the cooking. Show her where everything is, then you can get back to working cattle." "Ma'am, you're an angel of mercy." Pete practically threw the spoon down. "Supplies are in the pantry. Root cellar's outside, stays cold year-round. Smokehouse has beef and pork. Dutch keeps chickens, so we got eggs. Boss orders staples from town once a month, but if you need anything special, just tell Dutch." He walked her through the kitchen with the speed of a man escaping prison. Flour, sugar, salt, spices. The pantry was well-stocked, organized with military precision. The root cellar held potatoes, carrots, turnips, onions, all stored properly to last through winter. The smokehouse contained enough meat to feed an army. "I'll leave you to it, ma'am. Supper's at 6. The boys eat whatever you put in front of them, and they'll be grateful it's not my cooking." Pete grabbed his hat and fled. Eliza stood in the kitchen alone for the first time since arriving. She turned slowly, taking it all in. This wasn't just better than any kitchen she'd worked in. This was her kitchen, her domain. No Mrs. Harrington to criticize every move. No Richard to make inappropriate comments. Just her and the tools of her trade and the freedom to work without fear. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The beef stew came together with practiced efficiency. She started by searing chunks of chuck roast in the Dutch oven, getting a deep brown crust that would add flavor to the final dish. While the meat seared, she chopped onions, carrots, potatoes, added them to the pot with the meat, then covered everything with beef stock she found in the cold pantry. A bay leaf, some thyme, salt, and pepper. She set it on the back of the range to simmer for 3 hours. Biscuits next. Flour, baking powder, salt, lard, buttermilk. Her hands moved through the familiar motions, cutting the fat into the flour until it resembled coarse meal, adding just enough liquid to bring it together. She patted the dough out, cut rounds with a glass, placed them in a cast iron skillet. For dessert, an apple brown Betty. She had dried apples in the pantry, which she reconstituted in warm water with sugar and cinnamon. Layered them with breadcrumbs and butter in a baking dish. It would bake while they ate, the main course emerging hot and fragrant just in time. At 6 o'clock, she rang the bell mounted outside the kitchen door. The men came in groups of 3 and 4, stomping snow from their boots, hanging their hats on pegs by the door. They filed into the dining room where a long table held 20 chairs. They sat without assigned places, easy in each other's company. Cole sat at the head of the table, but it wasn't a position of authority so much as convenience. He was closest to the kitchen door, making it easier to pass food. The men talked quietly among themselves, the conversation of people who worked together and trusted each other. Eliza brought the stew out in the Dutch oven, setting it on a trivet in the center of the table. The biscuits followed, stacked high on a platter. Butter and honey, coffee in a large pot. "Miss Hayes," Cole gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Please join us." She hesitated. In 10 years, she had never eaten with the people she cooked for, never been invited to sit as an equal. "Ma'am, don't make us start without you." Dutch grinned. "That'd be poor manners." She sat. Cole said a brief grace, simple and sincere. Then the men began filling their bowls, passing the pot around the table. Steam rose in fragrant clouds. The biscuits disappeared with alarming speed. The first bite brought silence. Then Charlie, the young cowboy, set down his spoon with reverence. "Ma'am, this is the best meal I've had since my mama died." "Don't exaggerate, Charlie." Dutch took another bite, then nodded slowly. "All right, he's not exaggerating. Miss Hayes, you got a gift." Thomas the freedman closed his eyes. Lord have mercy, real food. I'd forgotten what it tastes like. The men ate with the appetite of people who worked physical labor in cold weather. They cleaned out the Dutch oven twice, Eliza refilling it from the pot she'd kept warming on the stove. The biscuits vanished to the last crumb. When she brought out the apple, brown Betty, still bubbling and fragrant, Red the Scotsman actually looked close to tears. Boss, he said solemnly, you give this woman whatever she wants, whatever it takes to keep her here. Cole smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. I intend to read. After dinner, the men helped clear the table without being asked, carrying dishes to the kitchen with careful courtesy. They thanked Eliza individually, each man sincere in his appreciation. Then they drifted back to the bunkhouse, their voices carrying through the cold night air, animated and cheerful. Cole remained in the dining room helping Eliza carry the last of the dishes. She heated water on the stove for washing. He dried while she washed, working in comfortable silence. Your men are kind, she said. They're good people. Most of them have stories like ours. Came west looking for second chances. I try to provide that. You pay them well. $40 a month through winter, $50 during summer operations. Room and board, medical care if they need it. I figure if I'm asking men to work hard, I should compensate them fairly. $40 a month for cowboys. Twice the standard rate. No wonder his men were loyal. They finished the dishes. Cole showed her upstairs to her room. It was in the corner with windows on two sides. A bed with a real mattress, not the straw-filled sack she'd slept on at Mrs. Pepper's. A dresser, a chair, a small desk. Simple furnishings, but clean and well-maintained. Locks on the inside. Cole pointed to the heavy brass mechanism. Your privacy matters. No one will enter without your permission. Thank you for all of this. Thank you for saying yes. He hesitated in the doorway. I meant what I said yesterday. Partners, we're going to build something that matters. After he left, Eliza sat on the bed testing its firmness. Through the window, she could see the mountains outlined against the star-filled sky. The Milky Way stretched overhead, a river of light impossible to see in town with its lamps and smoke. She'd forgotten how many stars there were. For the first time in 10 years, Eliza Hayes felt something like peace. But peace, she would learn, came at a price. The next morning, Dutch brought news from town. He'd gone in at dawn to collect supplies and returned with more than flour and sugar. He found Cole and Eliza in the kitchen, where she was preparing breakfast. Boss, we got problems. Dutch's normally cheerful face was grim. Word in town is that Richard Harrington is spreading stories. Says Ms. Hayes seduced you for security. Says the whole thing is inappropriate, probably immoral. Eliza felt her face flush. That's not true. I know that, ma'am. Anyone with eyes can see that. But the Harringtons got influence. The ladies' society is in an uproar. They're calling it a scandal. Cole's expression went hard as granite. Let them talk. There's more. Hendricks at the general store won't sell us supplies for any community Thanksgiving. Says Mrs. Harrington threatened to take her business elsewhere. Same with Wilson the butcher and Schmidt the baker. They're all refusing to deal with us. Then we'll find other suppliers. And there's been trouble at the stockyard. Someone cut the fence on the south pasture night before last. 30 head wandered toward the railroad tracks. Miguel found them at dawn just before the morning freight came through. Another hour and we'd have lost cattle and been liable for damages to the railroad. Why, Cole stood so fast his chair scraped against the floor. Sabotage. Looks that way. No way that fence broke natural. Clean cuts through 3 rails. Did Miguel see anyone? No, boss, but everyone in town knows who benefits from making you look bad. Richard Harrington. The name hung unspoken in the air. A man who'd grown up wealthy, who'd attended Harvard, who'd never built anything with his own hands. A man who saw Cole's success as a personal insult, a reminder that old money could be surpassed by hard work and merit. Cole turned to Eliza. This is going to get worse before it gets better. If you want to leave, I'll understand. I'll give you references, stake you to a new start somewhere else. No one would blame you. Eliza thought about running, about taking the easy path, about making herself invisible again, safe in obscurity. Then she thought about her parents who'd had so little but never compromised their dignity. About 10 years of being treated as less than human. About Cole standing up in that dining room sacrificing his business relationships to defend a stranger's humanity. I'm not leaving. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. Partners remember. Cole's expression softened. Partners. But that night Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay in her comfortable bed listening to the wind howl around the house and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. Mrs. Harrington's social pressure was one thing. Richard's sabotage was something else entirely. Cut fences could escalate to worse, and she was the cause of it all. At 3 in the morning, she made a decision. She'd leave quietly, return to town, take the stage to Helena or Billings, or anywhere else. Let Cole rebuild his relationships without her dragging him down. It was the right thing to do. She rose and began packing her few belongings. She'd accumulated little in 10 years of moving between positions. 2 dresses, undergarments, her mother's Bible, a few personal items. Everything fit in a single carpet bag. She was folding her second dress when the knock came. Soft but firm. "Eliza," Cole's voice gentle through the door. "Are you all right? I saw your lamp." She opened the door. He stood in the hallway wearing pants and an unbuttoned shirt, clearly dressed hastily. His eyes went immediately to the half-packed bag on her bed. His face went still. "You're leaving. It's better this way." She couldn't meet his eyes. "You can make peace with the Harringtons. Get your business back. I'm the problem." "No, Ben." The word came out flat and absolute. "You're not the problem. They are. But you're losing everything because of me. I'm losing nothing that matters." He stepped into the room, then caught himself aware of the impropriety. "May I come in? I promise I'll stay by the door." She nodded. He entered, but kept his distance, leaning against the doorframe with deliberate casualness. "Eliza, look at me." She did. His eyes in the lamp light were dark and intense, burning with a conviction. "I've been alone since my mother died, 22 years. Not lonely exactly, but alone. Working, building, proving myself, making money because I thought that's what mattered. Respect, position, wealth." He paused, searching for words. "Then you walked out that door with me. And I realized none of that other stuff matters. Not really. This matters." He gestured between them, building something real, standing up for what's right, having someone who sees the world the same way I do. "But your business relationships, your position in society, were built on treating people like you as invisible. If that's the price of success, I don't want it. You'll regret this. Eventually, you'll wake up and realize you sacrificed too much for a woman you barely know." Cole pushed off from the doorframe but didn't come closer. "I regret plenty in my life. I regret not being old enough to protect my mother. I regret not standing up to people like the Harringtons 20 years ago. But I will never, ever regret standing up for you." The conviction in his voice broke something in Eliza. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "I'm afraid I'm not worth all this trouble." "Then you underestimate yourself." He took one step forward, then stopped, giving her space. "Eliza Hayes, you walked away from security with nothing but your dignity. You proposed building something that would help the whole community, not just yourself. You're brave and smart and skilled. You're worth 100 of them." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Cole cleared his throat and stepped back to the doorway. "Please don't go. We're stronger together than apart." Eliza looked at her half-packed bag, at this man who had sacrificed so much for principle, at the open door leading to a future she could barely imagine. "All right." She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "I'll stay." The smile that crossed Cole's face transformed him, made him look younger, less burdened. "Good. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow we start planning how to make this Thanksgiving happen. Merchants or no merchants." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Eliza unpacked her bag, hanging her dresses back in the small wardrobe. She blew out the lamp and lay back down. Through the walls, she could hear Cole moving in his own room, settling back to sleep. For better or worse, she'd cast her lot with this man, with his vision of a better world, with the dangerous idea that people like them mattered as much as people like the Harringtons. Outside, the wind had died. Snow began to fall again, steady and soft, covering the ranch in fresh white. Inside, Eliza Hayes finally slept dreamless and deep, protected for the first time in her adult life by something more than locks and walls. Protected by the certainty that someone finally saw her worth defending. December arrived with teeth. The temperature dropped to 15 degrees, then 10, then held at 5 degrees for 3 days straight. Snow fell in steady curtains, accumulating in drifts that reached the windowsills. The cattle huddled in protected valleys, their breath forming clouds that hung in the still air. The hands worked in shifts, breaking ice on water holes, hauling hay to the herds, checking for cattle that had wandered into dangerous terrain. Eliza settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She woke at 4:30 each morning, started the kitchen fire, prepared breakfast for 12 hungry men. After they rode out, she cleaned prepared supplies for the next meal, experimented with recipes using the abundant provisions Cole made available. The work was hard, the hours long, but for the first time in her life, she worked for herself and people who valued her contribution. The hands thanked her after every meal. Dutch consulted her about supply orders. Cole asked her opinion on everything from menu planning to the logistics of their planned Thanksgiving dinner. 3 weeks after her arrival, they sat together at the kitchen table after supper, papers spread between them. The evening had become routine. The hands would finish eating, help clear the dishes with cheerful efficiency, then retreat to the bunkhouse. Cole and Eliza would remain planning their community Thanksgiving over coffee that grew cold as they worked. "We're thinking too small," Eliza said, studying the list they'd compiled. "We estimated 50 families, but there are more people than that who could use a real Thanksgiving." "How many are you thinking?" 75, maybe more. "Every ranch hand, every homesteader, every widow, every family that works with their hands and never gets invited to the Harrington's table." Cole leaned back in his chair, considering. "That's a lot of food. 5 turkeys at minimum, probably 6. Hams, all the sides, pies. We're looking at $200, maybe more. Can we afford it?" "I can afford it. The question is whether we should." He held up a hand before she could protest. "Not because of the money, because of what we're trying to build. If I just write a check, it's charity. That's not the point." "Then what do you suggest?" "We ask each family to bring something if they can. Make it communal. Those who can't contribute food, they contribute labor. Setting up, serving, cleaning. Everyone participates. Everyone has ownership." Eliza smiled. "That's perfect. It's not about one rich man feeding the poor. It's about community taking care of itself." They worked until midnight refining the plan. Cole would provide the turkeys and staples. Families would sign up to bring specific dishes, coordinating to avoid duplication. The church hall would serve as venue, Reverend Morrison having already agreed enthusiastically. They'd need tables, chairs, serving dishes, all of which could be borrowed or improvised. As Eliza stood to clear the coffee cups, her hand brushed Cole's on the table. Both froze. The touch lasted only a second, but electricity seemed to arc between them. Eliza pulled her hand back, her face flushing. "I should get to bed," she said quickly. "Early morning tomorrow." "Yes, of course." Cole's voice sounded strained. "Good night, Eliza." "Good night, Cole." She fled upstairs, her heart pounding. In her room, she pressed her hands to her hot cheeks. What was happening to her? Cole was her employer, her business partner. Nothing more. Couldn't be anything more. The age difference alone, 12 years, made any romantic notion inappropriate. And yet she couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at her sometimes. The way his voice softened when he said her name. The way he'd stood up for her in that dining room, sacrificing everything for a principle. She forced the thoughts away. This was dangerous territory. She was finally secure, finally building something meaningful. Romance would complicate everything, risk everything. Better to maintain the careful professional distance they'd established. Downstairs, Cole sat alone in the dark kitchen, staring at his hand where Eliza's had touched it. He was 40 years old, a man who'd spent 2 decades building an empire, and he felt like a boy with his first crush. It was ridiculous. Eliza was his employee, dependent on him for security and income. Any romantic advance would be an abuse of power, inappropriate, and potentially destructive to what they were building together. But God help him, he was falling for her. Had been falling since that first moment in the Harrington dining room when their eyes met and he'd seen her quiet dignity in the face of humiliation. Every day since then had only deepened his admiration, her skill in the kitchen, her intelligence in planning, her courage in staying despite the pressure, her kindness toward the hands, treating each man with respect regardless of his background or position. He extinguished the lamp and went to bed knowing sleep would be elusive. The next morning brought visitors. Cole was in the barn checking on a mare about to foal when Dutch found him. "Boss, you got company, Reverend Morrison and his wife." Cole walked to the main house, wiping his hands on a rag. The Reverend's buggy stood in the yard, the horses stamping in the cold. Reverend Morrison was 60 spare and weather-beaten, a man who'd come to Montana as a missionary and stayed because he loved the people. His wife, Martha, was 10 years younger, practical and kind, with a reputation for speaking her mind. Eliza had already invited them inside, serving coffee in the main room where the fireplace blazed. She looked relieved when Cole entered. "Reverend Mrs. Morrison, good to see you." "Coleman." The Reverend shook his hand firmly. "We came to talk about this Thanksgiving dinner you're planning." Cole's stomach tightened. Had the Reverend come to withdraw his offer of the church hall, Mrs. Harrington had tremendous influence, and the church depended on donations from wealthy families. "Mrs. Harrington came to see us," Martha Morrison said, confirming Cole's fears. "I see. She informed my husband that hosting your dinner would damage the church's reputation, that it was inappropriate, possibly immoral, that respectable families would withdraw their support." Cole nodded slowly. "I understand. If you need to withdraw the offer of the hall, I won't hold it against you. The church has to survive." Reverend Morrison smiled. "I told Mrs. Harrington that Christ spent most of his time eating with beggars, prostitutes, and tax collectors, that he criticized the religious leaders who valued propriety over compassion, that if following his example damages our reputation with the wealthy, so be it." Relief flooded through Cole. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. You're doing what the church should have been doing all along, building community across social lines, treating all people as equally valuable." The Reverend sipped his coffee. "The hall is yours, and Martha and I will be attending." After they left, Eliza turned to Cole with shining eyes. "We're really doing this. We're really doing this." But that afternoon, the first serious blow fell. Dutch returned from town with troubling news. He found Cole in the office going over ledgers. "Boss Hendricks won't sell us supplies, not just for Thanksgiving, for anything," says Mrs. Harrington made it clear that anyone who does business with us loses her patronage. Cole set down his pen. "What about Wilson and Schmidt?" "Same story. The butcher, the baker, even the feed store. They've all been warned. Do business with Cole Branson and lose the Harrington accounts." "How much does that represent?" "Hendricks alone sees maybe $200 a month from the Harrington family and their social circle. Wilson another 100. Schmidt probably 60. None of them can afford to lose that income." Cole calculated quickly. The Harringtons and their allies controlled perhaps $600 in monthly retail spending. For small-town merchants operating on thin margins, that was the difference between profit and poverty. "We'll go to the ranchers," Cole said. "The smaller operations, the ones outside the Harringtons' influence. They'll sell to us." "Already thought of that. Most are willing. But boss, that means extra travel hire costs, and we still can't get everything we need." Cole stood and walked to the window. Outside, snow fell steadily. The cattle were distant shapes in the white landscape. He'd built his empire through determination and hard work, but he'd always operated within the economic system using banks and merchants in established channels. Richard Harrington was attacking those channels, trying to isolate Cole economically. It was clever and potentially effective. That evening, Cole explained the situation to Eliza. They sat in the kitchen, the familiar space now charged with tension. "So we can't buy supplies in Miles City," Eliza said slowly. "What about surrounding towns?" "Possible but difficult. We're talking about a 100-mile round trip to Billings, 200 to Glendive. In winter weather, that's dangerous and expensive. What if we didn't buy supplies at all? What if we only used what families could contribute? 75 families bringing random dishes. It wouldn't be enough, and it wouldn't be coordinated." Eliza traced patterns on the wooden table with her finger. "Then we need to change our approach. Make it truly communal. Not Cole Branson hosting a dinner, but the community creating something together." "How?" She looked up, her eyes bright with sudden inspiration. "We divide responsibilities. Each family commits to a specific contribution based on what they have. Homesteaders bring vegetables from root cellars. Ranch wives bring paisan bread. Mexican families contribute what they can. We coordinate it all, make sure nothing's duplicated, ensure we have enough." Cole considered this. It could work, but we still need the turkeys and some staples. Things people can't provide from their own resources. "How much would that cost?" "Maybe $100. Less than half what we'd originally budgeted. And can you get that without using Miles City merchants?" I can ride to Billings, buy directly from wholesalers. It'll take 3 days round trip. But yes, Eliza reached across the table and took his hand. The gesture was spontaneous, born of shared purpose rather than romance. But the touch sent fire through Cole's veins. Then we can do this. We just have to work harder. Her hand in his felt right. Perfect. Like the missing piece of a puzzle he hadn't known was incomplete. He looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. She seemed to realize what she'd done, her eyes widening, but she didn't pull away. Eliza, his voice came out rough. I need to tell you something. Don't. She squeezed his hand once, then released it. Whatever you're about to say, don't. Not yet. We have too much at stake. Let's focus on making Thanksgiving happen. After that, we can talk about other things. She was right. He knew she was right. But it took every ounce of willpower not to speak the words burning in his throat. The next week brought escalation. Cole rode to Billings through increasingly dangerous weather, returning with supplies loaded in a reinforced wagon. The trip took 4 days instead of 3, the roads barely passable through snow. He returned exhausted and half-frozen but triumphant. They had 5 turkeys, 50 pounds of flour, 20 pounds of sugar, staples enough to supplement what the families would bring. While he was gone, Eliza coordinated with the community. She wrote letters. Dutch delivered them to farms and ranches throughout the valley. The response exceeded their hopes. 53 families committed to attending. Each signed up to bring specific dishes coordinated through a master list Eliza maintained with meticulous care. But Richard Harrington wasn't finished. 2 days after Cole returned from Billings, Miguel discovered more sabotage. This time, someone had contaminated one of the water tanks with lamp oil. 30 head of cattle drank from it before the hands noticed. Most got sick but recovered. 3 died. Cole stood beside the dead cattle, his face carved from stone. The financial loss was manageable, maybe $75. But the message was clear. Richard would keep escalating until Cole either capitulated or was destroyed. That night, Cole sat in his office staring at nothing. Eliza found him there past midnight, no lamp lit, just the dying glow from the fireplace. You should sleep, she said softly. Can't. Thinking. She sat in the chair across from his desk. About Richard. About whether I'm being selfish. Putting everyone at risk because of my pride. This isn't about pride. Isn't it? I could end this tomorrow. Apologize to the Harringtons. Send you away with enough money to start over somewhere safe. Get back to business as usual. Eliza leaned forward. Is that what you want? No, but what I want doesn't matter if people get hurt because of my stubbornness. People are already hurt, Cole. They've been hurt for years by a system that treats them as invisible. You're trying to change that. Yes, there's a cost, but the alternative is letting the Harringtons and people like them control everything forever. You could still leave. Richard's vendetta is against me. You'd be safe. I'm not leaving. Her voice carried absolute conviction. We're partners. That means we face this together. Cole looked at her across the desk. The firelight painted her face in gold and shadow, highlighting the determination in her eyes. She was 25 years old and had more courage than most men twice her age. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. Then be better. Be the man who stands up to Richard tomorrow and the day after. And every day until he realizes he can't win. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken emotion. Then Dutch's voice called from outside, urgent and alarmed. Boss, fire! They ran. The smokehouse was ablaze, flames licking up the log walls, smoke billowing into the night sky. The hands were already forming a bucket brigade from the well-passing water hand to hand. Cole grabbed a bucket and joined the line. Eliza did the same, ignoring his shouted order to stay back. They fought for an hour. The smokehouse was lost, the beef and pork inside destroyed. But they saved the nearby barn, soaking its walls until the wood ran with water. When the fire finally died to smoldering embers, they stood exhausted in the snow, clothes-soaked faces black with soot. Definitely arson, Dutch said grimly. I can smell kerosene, and look. He pointed to tracks in the snow leading away toward the road. 3 horses, left maybe an hour before the fire started, timed it so we'd be asleep. Cole's jaw clenched. Richard's getting desperate. Or more aggressive. Boss, this is serious. Next time it might be the barn with horses inside, or the bunkhouse with men sleeping. I know. Cole looked around at his hands, all watching him waiting for his decision. I won't ask you to stay if you want to leave. This isn't your fight. Charlie, the young cowboy, spat into the snow. Hell it isn't. Begging your pardon, Miss Hayes, but we're crew. What threatens you threatens us. The others murmured agreement. Thomas stepped forward. Mr. Branson, I came west looking for a place where a black man could be judged him by his work, not his skin. You gave me that. I'm not running because some rich boy throws a tantrum. Red added, I've worked for men who thought cowboys were livestock. You treat us like human beings. That's worth fighting for. One by one, the hands pledged their loyalty. Cole felt his throat tighten with emotion. These men, most of whom owned nothing but their horses and saddles, were willing to risk everything for principle. All right then, we triple the watch. 2 men on patrol at all times through the night. Everyone carries a weapon. And we finish this Thanksgiving dinner come hell or high water. The hands dispersed to clean up and get what sleep they could. Cole and Eliza walked back to the main house. Dawn was breaking, painting the snow pink and gold. They stood on the porch, both too wired to sleep despite the exhaustion. He's not going to stop, Eliza said. No, he's committed now. Stopping would mean admitting defeat. What will you do? Cole was quiet for a long moment. Visit him. Make it clear that if he escalates further, I'll respond in kind. I've got resources he doesn't, connections he can't match. If he wants a war, I'll give him one he can't win. That's dangerous. You could end up in a fight that destroys you both. Then he needs to understand that I'm willing to accept that outcome, that I'd rather lose everything than back down. He turned to look at her. Does that make me a fool? It makes you a man of principle. She met his eyes. But Cole, please be careful. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you. The admission hung between them. Eliza's eyes widened as she realized what she'd said. Cole took a step toward her, then stopped, holding himself in check. Eliza, I have to say this. I know the timing is terrible. I know we agreed to wait, but I might not get another chance, and I won't risk leaving it unsaid. Cole, don't. I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I already have fallen. I don't know when it happened. Maybe that first moment in the Harrington dining room. Maybe sitting across from you at Ida's diner. Maybe watching you plan this Thanksgiving with such determination. But it's happened, and I need you to know. Eliza closed her eyes, tears slipped down her cheeks. This is impossible. Why? Because you're my employer, because I'm dependent on you for everything. Because if this goes wrong, I lose not just a job, but the only real home I've had since my parents died. Then I'll wait, as long as it takes, until you feel secure enough, independent enough to make a choice without pressure. He took another step closer. But I needed you to know that what I feel isn't gratitude or obligation. It's real. She opened her eyes. I feel it too. God help me, I do. But I'm terrified. Of me. Of losing this. Of losing you. Of having something good and watching it get destroyed. Cole reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face in his hand. His thumb brushed away her tears. I can't promise this will work. I can't promise Richard won't destroy us both. But I can promise that whatever happens, I'll fight for you. For this. For the chance to build something real together. Eliza leaned into his touch. Promise me you'll be careful when you confront Richard. Promise me you won't do anything reckless. I promise. Now you promise me something. Promise you'll stay. No matter how bad this gets, promise you won't run. I promise. They stood there on the porch as the sun rose, his hand on her face, her hand covering his. It wasn't a kiss, wasn't even an embrace, but it was a commitment more binding than any contract. The hands emerged from the bunkhouse for breakfast, saw them standing together, and silently changed direction toward the barn. Dutch grinned and gave Charlie a knowing look. The boy would lose $5 in the betting pool they'd established about how long it would take the boss and the cook to figure out what everyone else already knew. Later that morning, Cole rode to Miles City. He went alone despite Dutch's protests. This needed to be handled man-to-man without the complications of witnesses or backup. He rode straight to the Harrington Bank, tied his horse outside, and walked through the ornate doors. The bank interior reflected Harold Harrington's aspirations. Marble floors, mahogany paneling, Brass fixtures polished to a mirror shine. Tellers worked behind gilded cages. Customers spoke in hushed tones as if wealth demanded reverence. Richard's office was on the second floor. Cole climbed the stairs without asking permission, ignoring the clerk who called after him. He opened the door without knocking. Richard sat behind an enormous desk, papers spread before him. He looked up startled, then his face twisted into a sneer. "Cole, come to apologize." Cole closed the door and crossed to the desk. He didn't sit, didn't raise his voice, just stood there radiating controlled fury. "Cut my fences. I'll cut yours and drive your cattle into the river. Poison my water. I'll poison your wells. Burn my property. I'll burn your bank to the ground." His voice never rose above conversational volume, which made the threat more terrifying. "Do you understand me, Richard? You're threatening me in my own office. I'm explaining consequences. You've been playing at war. I've actually fought in one. I know how to destroy an enemy completely." Richard stood, trying to recover some dignity. "You think you can threaten me? My family owns this town. Your family has influence. I have money connections and nothing to lose. Which do you think wins that fight?" They stared at each other across the desk. Richard was 32, educated at Harvard, comfortable in the world of contracts and social maneuvering. Cole was 40, forged in war and hard labor, comfortable with violence when necessary. The difference showed in their eyes. Richard looked away first. "Get out of my office. I'm not finished. This Thanksgiving dinner is happening. If you interfere again, if you hurt my people or my property, I'll destroy you financially. I'll call in every favor I have in Helena. I'll spread word to every rancher in Montana about your underhanded tactics. By the time I'm done, you won't be able to do business anywhere in this territory." "You're bluffing." Cole leaned forward, placing both hands on the desk. "Try me. Please, give me an excuse to ruin you." He left without another word. Behind him, Richard stood frozen, face pale with rage and something that might have been fear. Cole rode back to the ranch, his hands shaking with adrenaline. He'd meant every word. If Richard escalated again, Cole would go to war without hesitation. The realization should have troubled him. Instead, it felt liberating. He'd spent 20 years building wealth and respectability. Turned out neither mattered as much as protecting the people he cared about. When he reached the ranch, Eliza was waiting on the porch. She saw his face and came down the steps quickly. "What happened?" "I made my position clear. Richard knows the cost of continuing this vendetta. Will he stop?" "I don't know, but he knows I'm serious now." She took his hand, not caring if the hand saw from the barn. "Come inside. You need coffee and food." He let her lead him to the kitchen. She poured coffee, heated stew left from lunch made him sit and eat. The domestic care felt more intimate than any romantic gesture could have been. This was partnership. This was what it meant to have someone watching your back. As he ate, Eliza shared news. 3 more families signed up while you were gone. We're at 56 now, and Mrs. Morrison organized the ranch wives. They're coordinating peas and breads. We'll have more than enough. Any trouble from the Harringtons? Nothing direct, but I heard from Mrs. Chen at the boarding house. Mrs. Harrington is telling everyone we're going to fail, that no one will show up, that we'll be humiliated. Let her think that. The reality will be sweeter. They spent the evening finalizing details. The dinner was 3 weeks away, November 28th. Everything was coming together despite the obstacles. Cole felt cautiously optimistic for the first time in weeks. That night, he lay in bed, unable to sleep. His mind kept replaying the moment on the porch when he'd told Eliza he loved her. The feel of her face under his hand. The way she'd leaned into his touch. He was 40 years old and felt like a boy with his first love. Across the hall, Eliza lay equally awake. She'd been alone for 13 years, protecting her heart because letting anyone close meant risking devastation. But Cole had broken through her defenses without even trying. His courage, his integrity, his quiet strength. She was falling, had already fallen, and the knowledge terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. A freight wagon appeared on the road at dawn, piled high with supplies. The driver was a stranger, a weathered man in his 50s who introduced himself as Tom Brennan, owner of a feed store in Billings. "Mr. Branson, I heard you were having trouble buying supplies in Miles City. Thought I'd offer my services directly." Cole helped unload the wagon. flour, sugar, coffee, canned goods, everything the ranch needed, and more. When Cole asked about payment, Brennan named prices 20% below market rate. Why so cheap? Cole asked. Because I heard what you did at the Harrington dinner. Standing up for that cook. My wife worked in service when we were young, treated like dirt by people who thought they were better. What you did took guts. Figure I can help make your Thanksgiving happen. Small contribution to something good. Word spread. Over the next week, other suppliers appeared. A rancher from Paradise Valley brought 2 steers refusing payment. A Mexican family delivered bushels of dried chiles and masa for tamales. The Chinese workers from the railroad brought rice and vegetables preserved in ways Eliza had never seen. A group of homesteaders arrived with wagon loads of potatoes, carrots, and turnips from their root cellars. We heard you're building something different, their spokesman said. A table where everyone's welcome. We want to be part of that. Eliza stood in the kitchen, overwhelmed by the generosity. The community was rallying not because of Cole's wealth, but because of what he represented. The possibility that Montana could be different from the rigid social hierarchies they'd fled in the East. Dutch compiled the donations and whistled low. Boss, we've got enough food for 100 people. Maybe more. Then we'll invite more, Cole said simply. The invitations went out again, this time to families they'd initially overlooked. Widows living alone, elderly couples barely surviving on small homesteads, single cowboys who bunked in town with no family connections, the outcasts and the invisible, everyone who'd ever felt less than human in the presence of wealth and privilege. The responses flooded back. Yes, we'll be there. Thank you for including us. By the week before Thanksgiving, they had commitments from 78 families. The church hall would be packed beyond capacity. They'd need to set up additional tables outside under awnings heated by fires and metal drums. Eliza worked 18-hour days coordinating the massive undertaking. Who would bring what? When to start cooking? How to keep everything warm? The logistics were staggering, but she attacked the challenge with systematic precision, creating lists and schedules and contingency plans. Cole watched her with growing admiration. This was her gift, he realized. Not just cooking, but organization, coordination, leadership. She could have run a business empire if society had given her the chance. 3 days before Thanksgiving, the weather turned. A massive storm front moved in from Canada, dropping temperatures to -10 degrees. Snow fell in blinding sheets. The hands worked in desperate shifts, moving cattle to protected areas, ensuring water sources remained accessible, checking on the most vulnerable animals. Cole and Dutch rode out on the morning of the 26th, checking the furthest pastures. They found 20 head trapped in a box canyon, surrounded by 6-foot snowdrifts. It took 8 hours of brutal labor to dig them out and lead them to safety. By the time they returned to the ranch house, both men were exhausted and half frozen. Eliza met them at the door with hot coffee and dry clothes. She'd kept stew warming on the stove, bread fresh from the oven. Simple food, but it tasted like salvation to men who'd been working in sub-zero temperatures for 8 hours. Everyone's asking if we'll postpone the dinner, Eliza said. The roads are nearly impassable. Cole warmed his hands on the coffee mug. What do you think? I think people need this more than ever. Winter's closing in. Everyone's isolated, scared, facing months of hardship. Coming together now, proving we can help each other, that matters. Then we don't postpone. We make it happen. The day before Thanksgiving, families began arriving early. Those living far out couldn't risk traveling on the actual day, so they came a day ahead, bringing sleeping rolls and camping at the church. The building became a bustling community center. Women cooking together, men reinforcing the awnings for the outdoor tables, children playing in elaborate snow forts. Mrs. Morrison coordinated the chaos with cheerful efficiency. Eliza moved between groups, checking progress, solving problems, encouraging everyone. Cole and the hands set up tables, hauled firewood, ensured the metal drum fires would keep the outdoor diners warm. By evening, the church hall had transformed into something magical. Tables extended in long rows decorated with pine branches and candles. The kitchen blazed with activity, stoves going full blast, women working shoulder to shoulder, regardless of social class or ethnicity. Outside, the fires cast dancing shadows on the snow. The awnings stretched tight against the wind. That night, Cole found Eliza standing alone outside the church, looking up at the stars. The temperature had dropped to -15, but the storm had cleared, leaving the sky crystalline and brilliant with stars. "You should be inside," he said, coming up beside her. "Just needed a moment. It's overwhelming. You've done something incredible, you know that, right?" She turned to face him. In the firelight from the nearest drum, her face glowed. "We've done something incredible. Together." Cole couldn't help himself anymore. He pulled off his glove and touched her face, his bare hand cold against her skin. "Eliza Hayes, when this is over, when the dinner's finished and everyone's gone home, I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to think carefully about your answer." Her breath caught. "What question?" "You'll know it when you hear it, but I want you to understand that your answer changes everything. Yes or no, either way, everything changes." "I'm not good with suspense," he smiled. "2 more days, then we'll talk. For now, let's focus on making tomorrow perfect." She nodded, but her hand came up to cover his on her face. They stood that way for a long moment, the world reduced to the two of them and the stars overhead. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Tomorrow would test everything they'd built. But tonight, in this moment, they had each other and a community coming together against impossible odds. And for now, that was enough. Thanksgiving morning arrived clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to stretch forever. The temperature held at -5 degrees, but the wind had died, leaving the world crystalline and still. Smoke rose in straight columns from the church hall chimneys, visible for miles across the white landscape. Eliza woke before dawn, her mind already racing through the final preparations. She dressed quickly and found Cole in the kitchen, already stoking the fire in the range. He looked up as she entered, and something passed between them. Today was the culmination of everything they'd worked toward, everything they'd risked. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready." They rode to the church together, in the wagon wrapped in heavy blankets against the cold. The town was still dark, but as they approached the hall, lamplight glowed through every window. Inside, women were already working their voices, carrying through the morning air and cheerful chatter. Mrs. Morrison met them at the door, her face flushed from the heat of the kitchen. "We've been cooking since 4. The turkeys are perfect. Everything's coming together." The hall was controlled chaos. 10 women worked in the kitchen, each focused on their assigned tasks. The massive wood stove blazed, all 6 burners occupied. The air smelled of roasting meat, baking bread, cinnamon, and cloves. Outside, the men tended the fire drums, adjusting the flames to keep the outdoor dining area warm without creating smoke that would drift into the food. Families continued arriving throughout the morning. Some came in wagons loaded with dishes covered in cloth to keep them warm. Others arrived on horseback, their contributions tied carefully in saddlebags. An elderly couple walked the last mile from their homestead, the husband carrying a pot of his wife's famous baked beans still steaming. By noon, the transformation was complete. 3 long tables stretched through the hall and out under the awnings decorated with pine boughs and hand-carved wooden candle holders. 82 place settings, each one different. Some families had brought their own plates, mismatched but clean. Others used dishes borrowed from neighbors. It didn't matter. What mattered was that every seat represented a person who'd been told they didn't belong at tables like this. The food began arriving in earnest. 5 enormous turkeys, their skin crackling and golden. 3 honey-glazed hams. Bowls of mashed potatoes, each family's recipe slightly different. Sweet potato casserole topped with pecans. Green beans with bacon. Corn pudding. Stuffing with sage and onions. Fresh baked rolls, their crusts shining with butter. The Mexican families contributed tamales wrapped in corn husks, the masa tender and fragrant. Rice cooked with tomatoes and peppers. Calabacitas, the squash, soft and seasoned perfectly. The Chinese railroad workers brought dishes Eliza had never seen before. Rice cooked with preserved vegetables. Stir-fried greens. Sweet and sour cabbage that made her mouth water when she tasted it. And the pas. 15 pies lined the side table. Pumpkin, apple, berry, sweet potato, mincemeat. Each one a work of art, the crusts golden and flaky, the fillings rich and sweet. At 2 o'clock, Reverend Morrison rang the church bell. The sound carried across the valley, calling everyone to gather. People emerged from the hall, from the nearby houses where they'd been warming themselves, from the wagons where children had been playing. They came in ones and twos, and whole families streaming toward the tables like rivers flowing to the sea. 87 people, Eliza counted. 9 more than had committed to coming. Word had spread at the last minute, and people who'd thought they had nowhere to go had come anyway, hoping for welcome. They'd found it. Cole stood at the head of the main table, not elevated, not separate, just positioned where everyone could see him. The crowd quieted naturally, conversations fading, as people sensed something important was about to happen. He was 40 years old, weathered by sun and wind and hard labor, dressed in his Sunday suit that he wore maybe twice a year. But standing there surrounded by working people who'd come because they believed in what he represented, he looked like something more. A leader, yes, but also just a man who'd decided that principle mattered more than profit. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, his deep voice carrying easily in the cold air. A few people chuckled because everyone knew this was true. "But Thanksgiving's about gratitude, so I'll speak my piece." He paused, his eyes moving across the crowd. Eliza saw him take in every face. The homesteader who'd walked 2 miles through snow, the widow who'd brought her late husband's famous cornbread recipe, the Chinese workers who'd contributed a week's wages worth of food, the Mexican family who'd traveled from the valley's far end, the black cowboy who'd found in Montana what he couldn't find anywhere else, his own ranch hands who'd pledged their loyalty when it would have been easier to leave. "I'm grateful for second chances," Cole said. "For people who measure worth by character instead of bank accounts. For neighbors who help each other without keeping score. For the reminder that community matters more than commerce." His eyes found Eliza's across the crowd. She stood near the kitchen door, her apron still on, her hands clasped in front of her, their gazes held. "And I'm especially grateful for a woman whose courage reminded me what really matters. Who walked away from a table that didn't want her and helped build one that welcomes everyone. Miss Eliza Hayes, would you come here?" Every head turned toward her. Eliza felt her face flush. She hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for public attention. But she walked forward, weaving between the tables until she stood beside Cole. He took her hand right there in front of 87 witnesses. The gesture was deliberate, public, a statement that couldn't be misunderstood. "Miss Hayes and I are partners in building this community, but I'm hoping she'll agree to be my partner in everything else too." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. His mother's ring, simple gold, worn smooth by years of work. "Eliza Hayes, will you marry me?" The world stopped. Eliza stared at the ring, at Cole's face, at the hope and fear and love written there so clearly anyone could read it. Around them, 87 people held their breath. She thought of the girl she'd been a year ago. Invisible, hungry, convinced her worth lay only in what she could produce for others. She thought of her parents who'd had so little but loved so fiercely. She thought of the past month working beside this man to build something that mattered. The way he saw her, really saw her, not as a cook or an employee, but as an equal, a partner, someone worth sacrificing for. "Yes," the word came out strong and clear. "Yes, I'll marry you." The crowd erupted. Cheers, applause, whistles from the cowboys. Cole slid the ring onto her finger, his hand shaking slightly. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he did something she didn't expect. He pulled her close and kissed her right there in front of everyone. It was brief, respectful, but unmistakable. A claim and a promise. When they separated, both were grinning like fools. "Well then," Reverend Morrison said, his voice carrying over the celebration, "I think we have even more to be thankful for this year. Miss Hayes, would you do us the honor of blessing this meal?" Eliza looked out at the crowd, at faces of every color and background, at people who'd known hunger and invisibility and the casual cruelty of those who thought themselves better, at a community that had chosen to come together despite the cost. She took a breath and spoke from her heart. "Dear Lord, thank you for this food we share, for hands that prepared it and hearts that offered it freely. Thank you for this table where all are welcome, where we're judged by who we are, not what we own." Her voice strengthened. "Thank you for reminding us that we're stronger together than apart. That dignity isn't something given by the wealthy, but something we claim for ourselves. And thank you for second chances, for new beginnings, for the possibility of building something better. Amen." "Amen," 87 voices echoed. Then they ate, and it was glorious. Families passed dishes across tables, helping themselves to foods they'd never tried before. Children ran between the tables, stealing bites and laughing. The cowboys ate with the homesteaders, who ate with the Chinese workers, who ate with the Mexican families. No hierarchy, no separation, just people sharing a meal. The Mexican grandmother taught Mrs. Morrison how to make proper tamales. The Chinese cook showed Eliza a technique for quick frying vegetables that preserved their texture. Dutch swapped cattle stories with a homesteader who'd never worked a cow in his life, but was fascinated by the process. Charlie, the young cowboy, sat next to the widow who'd walked 2 miles. She reminded him of his mother, he said. She patted his hand and told him he was a good boy. Thomas, the black freedman, found himself in conversation with a white rancher who treated him with the same respect he'd give anyone. It was such a simple thing, such a basic human courtesy. But Thomas's eyes shone with tears anyway. The afternoon light slanted low through the windows, painting everything gold. Steam rose from the dishes in fragrant clouds. Conversation and laughter created a warm blanket of sound that wrapped around everyone present. This was what they'd built. Not just a meal, but proof that another way was possible. Eliza moved between tables, checking that everyone had enough, that no one was left out. Cole walked with her, his hand finding the small of her back, guiding her gently. The ring on her finger caught the light every time she moved. She couldn't stop looking at it. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I knew it was possible." As the sun set, families began the reluctant process of leaving. They had miles to travel, some of them, and winter darkness came early and dangerous. But each person stopped to thank Cole and Eliza before departing. Some shook hands, others embraced them. One elderly man, a homesteader who'd lost his wife the previous year, simply touched Eliza's shoulder and nodded, too overcome to speak. The Mexican grandmother pressed a small cloth bag into Eliza's hands. "For your wedding," she said in accented English. "Special herbs, for blessing." The Chinese cook bowed formally. "You honor us by including us. We not forget." By full dark, only the ranch hands and a few close friends remained. They helped clean, carrying dishes to the kitchen, stacking tables, sweeping floors. The work went quickly with so many hands. Within an hour, the hall looked almost as it had before, except for the lingering scent of turkey and pie and community. Cole and Eliza stood alone in the empty hall, the last lamp burning low. Her hand was in his, the ring solid and real on her finger. Tomorrow, Miles City would be buzzing with news of the dinner, of the proposal, of the success they couldn't deny. Mrs. Harrington would rage. Richard would sulk. The social elite would gossip and judge. None of it mattered. "When should we marry?" Cole asked. "Soon. I don't want to wait." "Valentine's Day. Give us time to plan, but not too long." Eliza smiled. "Perfect." They extinguished the lamp and walked out into the cold night. The stars blazed overhead, the same stars that had watched them walk away from the Harrington dinner a month ago. But everything was different now. Then they'd been two people walking toward an uncertain future. Now they were building something solid, something real, something that would outlast them both. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in thoughts of the day. But it was a comfortable silence, the kind that comes from deep understanding. They didn't need to fill every moment with words. Sometimes just being together was enough. At the ranch, Dutch met them with a grin so wide it threatened to split his face. "Boss, Miss Hayes, congratulations, the boys have something for you." The hands had decorated the main house with pine boughs and candles. A small celebration waited inside coffee and the last pieces of pie they'd saved from the feast. It was simple, but the gesture touched Eliza deeply. These men who owned so little had given what they could to mark the occasion. Charlie stood and raised his coffee mug. "To the boss and Miss Hayes, may you be as happy as you've made us." They drank, they talked, they laughed. And when the hands finally retreated to the bunkhouse, leaving Cole and Eliza alone in the warm kitchen, the world felt impossibly right. "I should go to bed," Eliza said, but she didn't move. "You should," Cole agreed, but his arms tightened around her waist. They stood that way for a long moment, just holding each other. The kitchen was warm from the stove. The lamplight cast soft shadows. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle and steady, covering the world in fresh white. "Thank you," Eliza whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me, for standing up for me, for building this with me." "You did the building. I just held the hammer." She pulled back to look at him. "We did it together. Partners." "Partners," he agreed. "Then soon to be husband and wife." The words hung in the air, full of promise and possibility. Eliza reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble, the weathered skin, the solid reality of him. I love you, Cole Branson. I love you, Eliza Hayes. Soon to be Eliza Branson. She liked the sound of that. Liked it more than she'd ever imagined she would. For 10 years, she'd been Eliza Hayes' invisible cook, nobody's daughter, nobody's wife. Soon she'd be Eliza Branson, partner to a good man, part of something larger than herself. They kissed again, longer this time without an audience. When they finally separated, both were breathless. February can't come soon enough, Cole said. We have a lot to do before then, planning a wedding, getting through winter, making sure the ranch survives. We'll manage. We always do. She smiled. Yes, we will. Eliza finally went upstairs to her room, but she knew it wouldn't be her room much longer. After February, she'd share the larger room across the hall. Share a bed, share a life, share everything. The thought didn't frighten her the way it might have a month ago. Now it felt like coming home. She changed into her nightgown and sat on the bed looking at the ring on her finger. Such a simple thing. Worn gold, no jewels, worth maybe $5 in a pawn shop, but priceless to her because of what it represented. Love freely given. A future built together. The end of invisibility. Through the wall, she could hear Cole moving in his own room, settling for the night. In 3 months, there would be no wall between them. In 3 months, they'd begin the next chapter. Not just as partners in a community project, but as husband and wife. Eliza blew out her lamp and lay down the ring, still on her finger. She fell asleep smiling, dreams full of spring and weddings and the life they would build together. The story of the Thanksgiving dinner spread through Montana territory like wildfire. Some told it as scandal, others as inspiration. But everyone agreed on the basic facts. Cole Branson, the cattle baron, had stood up for his cook against the wealthy elite. Together, they'd built something that challenged the very structure of frontier society. Mrs. Harrington raged for weeks, but her influence had begun to wane. People remembered who'd opened their doors and who'd kept them closed. Richard, facing the reality that his vendetta had failed spectacularly quietly, left for Denver in January, citing business opportunities. Nobody believed him. Everyone knew he was running from the humiliation of losing to people he'd considered beneath him. February 14th arrived cold but bright. The church was packed for the wedding. Not with society elite, but with working people dressed in their Sunday best. The same families who'd shared Thanksgiving dinner came to witness Cole and Eliza exchange vows. Reverend Morrison performed the ceremony with genuine joy. Dutch stood as best man. Mrs. Morrison stood with Eliza. The vows were simple, traditional, but the emotion behind them made several people weep. When Cole kissed his bride, the church erupted in cheers that could be heard all the way to town. The reception was held at the ranch, another communal feast. Families brought food, laughter, music. Someone produced a fiddle. Dancing followed the barn cleared for the occasion. Cole, who claimed he couldn't dance, waltzed with his wife while the community watched and cheered. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Cole and Eliza stood on the porch of their home watching families drive away through the snow. His arm was around her waist. Her head rested on his shoulder. The ring on her finger, his mother's ring, caught the lamplight. No regrets, he asked. Not one. Even though you're married to a stubborn cowboy who made enemies of the wealthiest family in Miles City, especially because of that, he laughed, the sound warm and free. They went inside into the home they now shared officially, into the life they'd built from courage and principle and love. 5 months later, on a warm May evening, Eliza stood at the kitchen stove preparing dinner. Cole came in from working horses, moving to wrap his arms around her from behind, as had become his habit. How was your day, Mrs. Branson? She leaned back into his embrace, her hand moving instinctively to rest on her belly, where a small swell was just beginning to show. Perfect, Mr. Branson. Absolutely perfect. His hands covered hers, feeling the new life growing there. Their child, due in November, another Thanksgiving blessing. We should tell the hands at dinner, Eliza said. They already know. Dutch noticed 2 weeks ago. There's a betting pool on whether it's a boy or girl. Eliza laughed. Of course there is. They stood that way for a moment, his hands over hers, both touching the promise of new life. Through the window, the Montana mountains rose eternal and beautiful. The ranch spread around them, solid and thriving. In the bunkhouse, the hands were gathering for dinner, their voices carrying through the evening air. This was home. This was family. This was what they'd built together from nothing but courage and conviction. Some tables are worth fighting for, Eliza thought. Others are worth building from scratch.